Come follow me reading November 28th to December 4th. Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. His ways are everlasting. You can study the scriptures for a lifetime and still find new insights. Don't feel that you have to comprehend everything right now. Pray for help to recognize the message you need today. Record your impressions. Reading the Old Testament often means reading prophecies about destruction. The Lord frequently called prophets to warn the wicked that his judgments were upon them. The ministries of Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah are good examples. In dreadful detail, these prophets foretold the downfalls of cities that, at the time, seemed strong and powerful: Nineveh, Babylon, and even Jerusalem. But that was thousands of years ago. Why is it valuable to read these prophecies today? Even though those prideful, wicked cities were destroyed, pride and wickedness persist. In today's world, we can sometimes feel surrounded by the evils that were condemned by the ancient prophets. We may even detect traces of them in our own hearts. These Old Testament prophecies reveal how the Lord feels about pride and wickedness, and they teach that we can turn away from these evils. Perhaps that's one reason we still read these ancient prophecies today. Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah, and others, weren't just prophets of doom, they were prophets of deliverance. The descriptions of destruction are tempered by invitations to come unto Christ and receive his mercy. Seek ye the Lord, seek righteousness, seek meekness. This was the Lord's way anciently, and it is his way today. His ways are everlasting. For overviews of these books, see Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah in the Bible Dictionary. Old Testament Student Manual. This is the chapter for Nahum, the burden of Nineveh. Introduction. The word burden, which is used to render the Hebrew masa, may be taken to mean both a lifting up of the voice, utterance, oracle, and a heavy lot or fate. The prophets used masa to describe the prophetic message or oracles revealed against a people. In this case, the prophecy was against Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. Jonah fled from the Lord because he did not want to call Nineveh to repentance. But when he finally accepted the Lord's call, Nineveh repented and was saved. See chapter 9. By Nahum's time, however, Nineveh had again become extremely wicked. Therefore, Nahum pronounced the Lord's burden upon the city. Like Judah, Nineveh had repented once and was saved, but then forgot the lesson and slid back into wickedness. Now she would have to take the consequences. To the scriptures. Nahum chapter 1. Nahum speaks of the burning of the earth at the second coming and of the mercy and power of the Lord. The burden of Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. Old Testament Student Manual. Nahum 1:1. When did Nahum prophesy? The date of Nahum's activities has been deduced from certain statements made in the prophecy. In chapter 3, verses 8 to 10, reference is made to the destruction of the city of Nahum, the Egyptian Thebes, as an already accomplished fact. We know Thebes was captured by Assurbanipal, the Syrian, in 663 BC. Therefore, Nahum's prophecy must have been written after that date. And since Nahum's prophecy deals with the coming destruction of Nineveh, we know it must have been written before 612 BC, the date of her downfall. We may date Nahum's ministry with some degree of probability, therefore, between the years 663 BC and 612 BC. Back to the scriptures. God is jealous, and the Lord revengeth. The Lord revengeth and is furious. The Lord will take vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserveth wrath for his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. The Lord hath his way in the whirlwind and in the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. He rebuketh the sea and maketh it dry, and drieth up all the rivers. Bashan languisheth, and Carmel and the flower of Lebanon languisheth. The mountains quake at him, and the hills melt, and the earth is burned at his presence, yea, the world and all that dwell therein. Who can stand before his indignation, and who can abide in the fierceness of his anger? His fury is poured out like fire, and the rocks are thrown down by him. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knoweth them that trust in him. But with an overrunning flood he will make an utter end of the place thereof, and darkness shall pursue his enemies. What do ye imagine against the Lord? He will make an utter end. Affliction shall not rise up the second time. And while they be folden together as thorns, and while they are drunken as drunkards, they shall be devoured as stubble fully dry. Old Testament Student Manual, Nahum 1:2-10, the Second Coming. Nahum employed imagery usually associated with the Savior's second coming to depict Assyria's future devastation. Assyria would be as easily burned as dry stubble in a field. Here is yet another example of the prophetic dualism so common in the Old Testament. Back to the scriptures. There is one come out of thee that imagineth evil against the Lord, a wicked counselor. Thus saith the Lord, though they be quiet, and likewise many, yet thus shall they be cut down when he shall pass through. Though I have afflicted thee, I will afflict thee no more. For now I will break his yoke from off thee, and will burst thy bonds in sunder. Old Testament Student Manual, Nahum 1:11-13, a wicked counselor. Still prophesying of Judah's future, Nahum spoke of one very wicked counselor, whose yoke upon Judah, probably a large yearly tribute, was to be broken. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, had invaded Judah with a force of nearly 200,000 men. The prophecy foretold that Sennacherib would die shortly, and the house of his gods would become his grave. While he was worshipping in the temple dedicated to the god Nisroch, Sennacherib's two sons, Adramelech and Sharezer, murdered their father as Nahum had prophesied. Back to the scriptures. And the Lord hath given a commandment concerning thee, that no more of thy name be sown. Out of the house of thy gods will I cut off the graven image, and the molted image I will make thy grave, for thou art vile. Old Testament Student Manual, Nahum 1:1-14. The prophecies of Nahum were written in superb Hebrew poetry. Nahum was a poet. When he saw in vision the end of Assyria, he poured forth in unrestrained and picturesque Hebrew the relief felt by his people. In many ways his poetry vents the wrath, sighs the relief, and bespeaks the hope of all who have been oppressed, when the oppressions at last have ceased and the oppressor is no more. But Nahum was also a prophet, and he saw in Assyria's downfall an example of the hand of God in justice, reaping with a vengeance all the enemies of good, while he preserves in mercy and with patience those who try to do good. Envisioning the overthrow of this cruel and mighty empire, whose kings in their own records boast of the captives they have maimed, the realms they have subjected, and the treasures they have confiscated, Nahum tells how the doom of the mighty and the wicked is decreed, deserved, and done. For a detailed description of Assyria's brutality and cruelty, see Enrichment D. His book begins with an acrostic, with one sophra or stanza for each of the first 15 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, with 2 alterations of the sequence. The first 7 strophes, verses 2-5 in English, emphasize God's power over nature and over his enemies, but the third, verse 3, interrupts to tell of his goodness and justice. The second 7 strophes emphasize his power over all enemies and evils, but again tells by contrast in the third of the series, verse 7, of his goodness and his mercy to those who take refuge in him. The 15th and final strophe, verse 10, provides a summary and a transition to the next subject to be treated, the castigation of Nineveh. Assyria and Judah are alternately addressed in the next poem, verses 11-14. The one is to be punished and the other to be redeemed. It concludes with a hopeful verse speaking of a peaceful age in terms that seem to herald the messianic age when all oppressors shall have ceased. Back to the scriptures. Behold upon the mountains the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth peace. O Judah, keep thy solemn feast, perform thy vows, for the wicked shall no more pass through thee, he is utterly cut off. Nahum chapter 2. Nineveh will be destroyed, which is a symbol of what will be in the latter days. He that dasheth in pieces is come up before thy face. Keep the munition, watch the way, make thine loins strong, fortify thy power mightily. For the Lord hath turned away the excellency of Jacob, as the excellency of Israel, for the emptiers have emptied them out, and marred their vine branches. The shield of his mighty men is made red, the valiant men are in scarlet. The chariots shall be with flaming torches in the day of his preparation, and the fir tree shall be terribly shaken. The chariots shall rage in the streets, they shall jostle one against another in the broad ways. They seem like torches, they shall run like lightnings. He shall recount his worthies, they shall stumble in their walk, they shall make haste to the wall thereof, and the defense shall be prepared. The gates of the river shall be opened, and the palace shall be dissolved. And Huzzab shall be led away captive, she shall be brought up, and her maids shall lead her, as with the voice of doves, tabering upon their breasts. But Nineveh is of old like a pool of water, yet they shall flee away. Stand, stand, shall they cry, but none shall look back. Take ye the spoil of silver, take the spoil of gold, for there is none end of the store, and glory out of all the pleasant furniture. She is empty and void and waste, and the heart melteth, and the knees smite together, and much pain is in all loins, and the faces of them all gather blackness. Where is the dwelling of the lions, and the feeding place of the young lions, where the lion, even the old lion, walked, and the lions whelp, and none made them afraid? The lion did tear in pieces enough for his whelps, and strangled for her lionesses, and filled his holes with prey, and his dens with raven. Behold, I am against thee, saith the Lord of hosts, and I will burn her chariots in the smoke, and the sword shall devour thy young lions, and I will cut off thy prey from the earth, and the voice of thy messengers shall no more be heard. Old Testament Student Manual, Nahum 2:11-13. I am against thee. In these verses, Nahum wrote of a taunting hymn of grief at the fall of Nineveh. Where, he asked, is the dwelling of the lions and the feeding place of the young lions? This is like saying, where are those ferocious ones who once discomfited and attacked my people? I will cut off thy prey from the earth, and the voice of thy messengers shall be no more heard. Back to the scriptures, Nahum chapter 3. The miserable downfall of Nineveh is foretold. Woe to the bloody city! It is all full of lies and robbery. The prey departeth not. The noise of a whip, and the noise of the rattling of the wheels, and of the prancing horses, and of the jumping chariots. The horseman lifteth up both the bright sword and the glittering spear, and there is a multitude of slain, and a great number of carcasses, and there is none end of their corpses. They stumble upon their corpses. Because of the multitude of the whoredoms of the well-favored harlot, the mistress of witchcrafts, that selleth nations through her whoredoms, and families through her witchcrafts. Behold, I am against thee, saith the Lord of hosts, and I will discover thy skirts upon thy face, and I will show the nations thy nakedness, and the kingdoms thy shame. And I will cast abominable filth upon thee, and make thee vile, and will set thee as a gazing stock. And it shall come to pass that all they that look upon thee shall flee from thee, and say, Nineveh is laid waste. Who will bemoan her? Whence shall I seek comforters for thee? Old Testament Student Manual, Nahum 3:1-7. Woe to the bloody city. These verses pronounce the worst of woes on Nineveh, the bloody city. She was a harlot, wicked in the extreme, and her punishments were merited because she was a mistress of witchcrafts that sold nations through her whoredoms. In other words, she not only turned to wickedness herself, but exported that wickedness to many others through her power and influence. Back to the scriptures. Art thou better than populous No, that was situate among the rivers, that had the waters round about it, whose rampart was the sea, and her wall was from the sea? Ethiopia and Egypt were her strength, and it was infinite. Put and Lubim were thy helpers. Yet was she carried away, she went into captivity, her young children also were dashed in pieces at the top of all the streets, and they cast lots for her honorable men, and all her great men were bound in chains. Thou also shalt be drunken, thou shalt be hid, thou shalt also seek strength because of thine enemy. Old Testament Student Manual, Nahum 3:8-11. Art thou better? As other wicked cities had met destruction, so would Nineveh. She was no better than the Egyptian city Ammon, or Thebes, which was earlier destroyed by Assurbanipal, king of Assyria. Neither of the allies of Thebes, Ethiopia or Libya, had been able to protect her. Nineveh too would seek strength in allies and find none. Back to the scriptures. All thy strongholds shall be like fig trees with the first ripe figs. If they be shaken, they shall even fall into the mouth of the eater. Behold, thy people in the midst of thee are women. The gates of thy land shall be set wide open unto thine enemies. The fire shall devour thy bars. Draw thee waters for the siege. Fortify thy strongholds. Go into clay and tread the mortar. Make strong the brick kiln. There shall the fire devour thee, the sword shall cut thee off, it shall eat thee up like the cankerworm. Make thyself many as the cankerworm, make thyself many as the locust. Thou hast multiplied thy merchants above the stars of heaven, the cankerworm spoileth and flieth away. Thy crowns are as the locusts, and thy captains are as great grasshoppers, which camp in the hedges of the cold day, but when the sun ariseth they flee away, and their place is not known where they are. Thy shepherds slumber, O king of Assyria, thy nobles shall dwell in the dust, thy people is scattered upon the mountains, and no man gathereth them. There is no healing of thy bruise, thy wound is grievous. All that hear the bruit of thee shall clap the hands over thee, for upon whom hath not thy wickedness passed continually. Old Testament Student Manual, points to ponder. An epitaph for Nineveh. Rasmussen summarized the lessons of Nahum in these words. The final poem, chapter 3, opens with a prelude on the evils of the oppressive city Nineveh. Her lies, rape, and sorcery, her praise and thousands slain, her harlotry and witchcraft, and the seduction of the nations are all told. Because of this, the prophet says she shall become detestable. Like others, strong but wicked, Nineveh shall fall. All her defenses shall be useless when her leaders flee like locusts. Her end has come. There remains for the prophet but to write the epitaph. Verses 18-19. Thy shepherds slumber, O king of Assyria. Thy worthies are at rest. Thy people are scattered upon the mountains, and there is none to gather them. There is no assuaging of thy hurt. Thy wound is grievous. All that hear the report of thee clap the hands over thee, for upon whom hath not the wickedness passed continually. Nahum's message is still true. Decadence ends in destruction. Although the Lord is slow to anger, he is also great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. His mercy shall not rob justice, but neither will justice rob his mercy. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knoweth them that trust in him. Come follow me, Manual, Nahum 1. The Lord is both powerful and merciful. Nahum's mission was to foretell the destruction of Nineveh, the capital of the violent empire Assyria, which had scattered Israel and brutalized Judah. Nahum began by describing God's wrath and matchless power, but he also spoke about God's mercy and goodness. You might consider identifying verses in chapter 1 that help you understand each of these attributes and other attributes of God that you notice. Why do you think it is important to know each of these things about the Lord? Some might find it difficult to reconcile the scriptural teaching that the Lord is good with the teaching that the Lord will take vengeance on his adversaries. In the Book of Mormon, Alma's son, Corianton, had similar questions concerning the justice of God in the punishment of the sinner. To learn more about God's mercy and how it relates to his justice, read Alma's answer to Corianton in Alma 42. Old Testament Student Manual. This is the chapter for Habakkuk. A question is asked of the Lord. Habakkuk differs markedly from the other prophetic books. whereas most of the others contain the words of the Lord addressed to the people. In the book of Habakkuk the prophet, as the representative of the people, addresses and challenges the Lord. He begins by complaining about the apparent indifference of the Lord to violence and strife and widespread corruption in Judah. The prophet is puzzled over this indifference, knowing as he does the righteous and holy character of God. The Lord, in answer to this complaining, states that he is about to raise up the Chaldeans to execute judgment. The prophet is only the more perplexed at this answer, for he fails to understand why the Lord should use the cruel and fierce Chaldeans to execute judgment upon people who are more righteous than they are. The Lord, however, points out that the Chaldeans are to be but temporarily triumphant. They shall eventually meet with destruction, whereas the righteous shall live by faith. The oppressed nations may begin at once to rejoice over the fall of the Chaldeans, hence the prophet's taunt song against them, which takes the form of 5 woes upon the corrupt traits in the enemy's character and his many cruelties. The book ends in a beautiful anthem of praise, called in the title of chapter 3, a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet. To the scriptures. Habakkuk chapter 1. When Habakkuk learns that the Lord will raise up the Chaldeans to overrun the land of Israel, he is troubled that the wicked can be thus employed. The burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. Old Testament Student Manual, Habakkuk 1:1. Who was Habakkuk and when did he minister? Habakkuk most probably served his ministry after the appearance of the Chaldeans in world history. Many scholars believe that he wrote after the Battle of Carchemish, in which Nebuchadnezzar defeated the Egyptians in 605 BC, and before the first deportation of the Jews in 597 BC. From his writing, it is also believed he lived in Jerusalem. If this is the case, then he was a contemporary of Lehi and Jeremiah, prophesying to the same people. Nothing is known about the man himself other than what may be inferred from his writings. The traditional material that has filtered down concerning him is evidently legendary and cannot be comfortably relied upon. It is known that he was a great prophet who left one of the noblest and most penetrating words in the history of religion. Back to the scriptures. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. Why dost thou show me iniquity, and cause me to behold grievance? For spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that raise up strife and contention. Therefore the law is slacked, and judgment doth never go forth. For the wicked doth compass about the righteous. Therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. Old Testament Student Manual, Habakkuk 1:2-4. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Habakkuk, like other prophets through the ages, wondered why the Lord would not answer his prayers. Doubtless everyone who believes in God has felt forsaken at times. Joseph Smith and even Jesus experienced this loneliness at least once in their lives. See Doctrine and Covenants 121, 1-6, and Matthew 27:46. Ellis T. Rasmussen described Habakkuk's dilemma in this way. Habakkuk's miseries likely arose in the days of Judah's denigration, after the time of Assyria's conquest of northern Israel, and before the time when Babylonia came to carry the remaining tribe, Judah, away into captivity. The religious reforms of Hezekiah in his century, and those of Josiah 100 years later, about 620 BC, had put the just and the right at the helm in Judah for a time. But as always, resurgent corruption in politics, in morals, and in religion swiftly reappeared when the champions of right were gone. Religious compromises induced by the desires of the liberal and the libertine, ever seeking to soften the restrictions and responsibilities of Israel's covenant faith, brought derision and persecution upon the pious and the faithful. Under these conditions, Jeremiah suffered, and it is likely that this was also the setting of Habakkuk's ministry. Thus it is that he cries out against the iniquity, grievance, spoiling, violence, strife, and contention on every side. For the processes of justice and execution of the law seem endlessly delayed when the righteous are encompassed about by the wicked. Back to the scriptures. Behold, ye among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvelously, for I will work a work in your days, which ye will not believe, though it be told you. For lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land, to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful, their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves. Their horses are also swifter than the leopards, and are more fierce than the evening wolves. And their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from far. They shall fly as the eagle that hasteth to eat. They shall come all for violence. Their faces shall suck up as the east wind, and they shall gather the captivity as the sand. And they shall scoff at the kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. They shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap dust and take it. Then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and offend, imputing this his power unto his God. Art thou not from everlasting, O Lord my God, mine Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, thou hast ordained them for judgment, and O mighty God, thou hast established them for correction. Thou art of purer eyes than to behold evil, and canst not look on iniquity. Wherefore looketh thou upon them that deal treacherously, and holdeth thy tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he? And maketh men as the fishes of the sea, as the creeping things that have no ruler over them. They take up all of them with the angle, they catch them in their net, and gather them in their drag. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they sacrifice unto their net, and burn incense unto their drag, because by them their portion is fat, and their meat plenteous. Shall they therefore empty their net, and not spare continually to slay the nations? Old Testament Student Manual, Habakkuk 1, 5-17. I raised up the Chaldeans. Habakkuk's lament is one that has been raised by many. Why does the Lord allow wicked people and nations to operate, and why are they allowed, in some cases, to punish God's people? Habakkuk did not mention the Babylonians, Chaldeans, in his question, but it is obvious from the Lord's answer that they were the ones of whom Habakkuk was thinking. The Lord replied that he intended to use the Chaldeans for his righteous purposes in such a way that it would be difficult for Habakkuk to believe it. The Lord's response merely increased Habakkuk's confusion. How could God condone the cruelties of a nation more wicked than Judah? Were the Chaldeans never to get what was due them for their evil ways? Habakkuk's faith was being tested. Back to the scriptures, Habakkuk chapter 2. The Lord admonishes patience and promises that the just will live by faith. The earth will be filled with knowledge about God. Idols have no power. I will stand upon my watch, and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me, and what I shall answer when I am reproved. And the Lord answered me, and said, Write the vision, and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak, and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. Behold, his soul which is lifted up is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. Old Testament Student Manual, Habakkuk 2. What was meant by the just shall live by his faith? Sperry wrote that this verse is one of the greatest passages of the Old Testament. It means essentially this: there is a moral and spiritual distinction between the Chaldeans and the people of Judah. The Chaldeans, puffed up and arrogant, priding themselves in their wealth and power and deceptive in their dealings with other nations, do not possess the moral and spiritual elements which alone can ensure permanence and stability. The people of the Lord, on the other hand, should possess moral integrity, fidelity, and spiritual insight which ensure for them a future. The future belongs to the righteous. When the prophet says that the righteous shall live by his faith, more accurately faithfulness, he implies permanency. Back to the scriptures. Yea, also, because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man, neither keepeth at home, who enlarges his desire as hell, and is as death, and cannot be satisfied, but gathereth upon him all nations, and heapeth upon him all people. Shall not all these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, Woe to him that increaseth that which is not his, how long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. Shall they not rise up suddenly that shall bite thee, and awake that shall vex thee, and thou shalt be for booties upon them? Because thou hast spoiled many nations, all the remnant of the people shall spoil thee, because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land, of the city, and of all that dwell therein. Woe to him that coveteth an evil covetousness in his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil. Thou hast consulted shame to thy house by cutting off many people, and hast sinned against thy soul. For the stone shall cry out of the wall, and the beam out of the timber shall answer it. Woe to him that buildeth a town with blood, and stablisheth a city by iniquity. Behold, is it not to the Lord of hosts that the people shall labor in the very fire, and the people shall weary themselves for very vanity? For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, that putteth thy bottle to him, and maketh him drunken also, that thou mayest look on their nakedness. Thou art filled with the shame for glory. Drink thou also, and let thy foreskin be uncovered. The cup of the Lord's right hand shall be turned unto thee, and shameful spewing shall be on thy glory. For the violence of Lebanon shall cover thee, and the spoil of beasts, which made them afraid, because of men's blood, and for the violence of the land, of the city, and of all that dwell therein. What profiteth the graven image, that the maker thereof hath graven it, the molten image, and a teacher of lies, that the maker of his work trusteth therein to make dumb idols? Woe unto him that saith to the wood, Awake, to the dumb stone, Arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is laid over with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in the midst of it. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Habakkuk chapter 3. In his prayer, Habakkuk trembles at the majesty of God. A prayer of Habakkuk the prophet upon Shigionoth. O Lord, I have heard thy speech and was afraid. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years make known. In wrath remember mercy. Old Testament Student Manual, Habakkuk 3, 1-2. What are Shigionoth and a Selah? A Shigionoth may have been a stringed instrument, or perhaps a musical expression used to accompany singers. Possibly this prayer of Habakkuk was set to music, and intended for use in the temple. A selah was a cue for the person singing or chanting the words. The use of this word in Psalms is further evidence that Habakkuk's prayer may have been set to music. Back to the scriptures. God came from Teman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. And his brightness was as the light. He had horns coming out of his hand, and there was the hiding of his power. Before him went the pestilence, and burning coals went forth at his feet. He stood and measured the earth. He beheld and drove asunder the nations, and the everlasting mountains were scattered. The perpetual hills did bow. His ways are everlasting. I saw the tents of Cushan in affliction, and the curtains of the land of Midian did tremble. Was the Lord displeased against the rivers? Was thine anger against the rivers? Was thy wrath against the sea, that thou didst ride upon thy horses and thy chariots of salvation? Thy bow was made quite naked, according to the oath of the tribes, even thy word, Selah. Thou didst cleave the earth with rivers. The mountains saw thee, and they trembled. The overflowing of the water passed by. The deep uttered his voice, and lifted up his hand on high. The sun and moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of thine arrows they went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear. Thou didst march through the land in indignation. Thou didst thresh the heathen in anger. Thou wentest forth for the salvation of thy people, even for salvation with thine anointed. Thou woundedst the head out of the house of the wicked by discovering the foundation unto the neck. Selah. Thou didst strike through with his staffs the head of his villages. They came out as a whirlwind to scatter me. Their rejoicing was as to devour the poor secretly. Thou didst walk through the sea with thine horses, through the heap of great waters. When I heard, my belly trembled, my lips quivered at the voice. Rottenness entered into my bones, and I trembled in myself, that I might rest in the day of trouble. When he cometh up unto the people, he will invade them with his troops. Although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be in the vines, the labor of the olive shall fail, and the field shall yield no meat. The flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and he will make my feet like hinds' feet, and he will make me to walk upon mine high places, to the chief singer on my string instruments. Old Testament Student Manual, Habakkuk 3:4-20. Trust in God. The entire chapter is excellent Hebrew poetry. Habakkuk makes a number of references to events of Moses and Joshua's time. Anyone familiar with those biblical events will recognize the ones alluded to. The burden of Habakkuk's prayers for Jehovah to return and sustain Israel as in days of old. This he will surely do in the latter days. Habakkuk's trust was fully in God. Rasmussen said of Habakkuk's song of praise, after his experience, Habakkuk felt inspired to utter a psalm of praise to God and to trust in him. In awe at the powers and glory of God, he poetically describes the power of deity over all facets and functions of nature, and speaks of his might to overcome all of his enemies. Then in the spirit expressed also by Job, who said, though he slay me, yet I will trust him. Habakkuk lists in 6 poetic lines the disasters that could come to him, but strongly he avers in his last 5 lines. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord, I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and he will make my feet like hinds' feet, and he will make me to walk upon mine high places. It is for this trust in God, in spite of the vicissitudes of life, that Habakkuk's message is for us also today, a wholesome stimulant. Points to ponder. Why does God suffer the wicked to punish his people? Using the book of Habakkuk as your primary source, write an answer for the question, why does God allow the wicked to punish his people? It is true that the people of Israel did some evil things, but were they any worse than things done by Assyria or Babylon? The Nephites in Captain Moroni's time were not perfect either, but weren't they living at a higher level than the Lamanites who attacked them? Were the Jews of Jesus' day less obedient than the Romans who destroyed them? As you formulate your answer, you may also wish to consider Doctrine and Covenants 82, 3-4, and Doctrine and Covenants 103, 5-10. Come Follow Me Manual, Habakkuk. I can trust the Lord's will and his timing. Even prophets sometimes have questions about the Lord's ways. Habakkuk, who lived at a time of widespread wickedness in Judah, began his record with questions to the Lord. How would you summarize Habakkuk's concerns? Have you ever had similar feelings? The Lord responded to Habakkuk's questions by saying that he would send the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, to punish Judah. But Habakkuk was still troubled, for it seemed unjust for the Lord to stand by when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous. What do you find in Habakkuk 2, 1-4 that inspires you to trust the Lord when you have unanswered questions? Chapter 3 of Habakkuk is a prayer of praise to God and an expression of faith in him. What impresses you about Habakkuk's words in verse 17-19? How is the tone of these verses different from Habakkuk 1, 1-4? Ponder how you can develop greater faith in God even when life seems unfair. See also Hebrews 10:32-39, Doctrine and Covenants 121, 1-6, and Robert D. Hale's talk, Waiting Upon the Lord, Thy Will Be Done, in the November 2011 Ensign or Liahona. Old Testament Student Manual. This is the chapter for Zephaniah, the day of the Lord's wrath. Zephaniah was probably a contemporary of Jeremiah, Lehi, Nahum, and possibly Habakkuk. The immediate occasion of his preaching appears to have been the advance of an enemy which threatened Judah and his neighbors with sudden and complete destruction. Evidently, the dreaded foe is not their old masters, the Assyrians, nor their allies, the Egyptians, but the barbarous Scythians, who had already disturbed the politics of southwestern Asia. A detachment of these ruthless foes, who worshipped their swords and gloried only in murder and plunder, was evidently already sweeping down the eastern shore of the Mediterranean. The prophet had his text, and his audience good reason to listen. Their old complacency was shaken. The awakened national conscience found expression on the lips of the royal prophet. Rising above the terror of the moment, he announced that these pitiless destroyers were Jehovah's instrument of punishment, and the catastrophe that threatened his day of judgment. K and D pointed out that Zephaniah used the immediate danger to stress the universal nature of God's judgment. Zephaniah's prophecy has a more general character, embracing both judgment and salvation in their totality, so as to form one complete picture. It not only commences with the announcement of a universal judgment upon the whole world, out of which the judgment rises that will fall upon Judah on account of its sins, and upon the world of nations on account of its hostility to the people of Jehovah, but it treats throughout the great and terrible day of Jehovah, on which the fire of the wrath of God consumes the whole earth. Such a message has meaning for people today as the world prepares for its spiritual and temporal judgment. To the scriptures. Zephaniah chapter 1. The destruction of Judah is symbolic of the second coming. It is the day of the Lord's sacrifice, a day of wrath and trouble. The word of the Lord which came unto Zephaniah the son of Cushi, the son of Gedaliah, the son of Amariah, the son of Hezekiah, in the days of Josiah the son of Ammon, king of Judah. Old Testament Student Manual. Zephaniah 1:1. Who was Zephaniah? Zephaniah was commissioned by God to warn Judah and encourage her to repent. He was a contemporary of King Josiah, and his ministry probably played an important part in the reform movement of that time. Israel was at a pivotal point between peril and safety. Zephaniah's sweeping prose account of God's judgment upon the wicked and the eventual triumph of his kingdom was the message vacillating Judah needed to hear. The brief genealogy in verse 1 traces Zephaniah back to Hezekiah. It is not known whether this individual was the same as Hezekiah the king, and the other names are not of known individuals. Nothing is known of the life of Zephaniah beyond what can be inferred from his book. To the scriptures. I will utterly consume all things from off the land, saith the Lord. I will consume man and beast. I will consume the fowls of the heaven and the fishes of the sea, and the stumbling blocks with the wicked. And I will cut off man from off the land, saith the Lord. I will also stretch out mine hand upon Judah and upon all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and I will cut off the remnant of Baal from this place, and the name of the Chamarans with the priests, and them that worship the host of heaven upon the housetops, and them that worship and that swear by the Lord, and that swear by Malcolm, and them that are turned back from the Lord, and those that have not sought the Lord, nor inquired for him. Hold thy peace at the presence of the Lord God, for the day of the Lord is at hand. For the Lord hath prepared a sacrifice, he hath bid his guests. And it shall come to pass in the day of the Lord's sacrifice, that I will punish the princes, and the king's children, and all such as are clothed with strange apparel. In the same day also will I punish all those that leap on the threshold, which fill their masters' houses with violence and deceit. Old Testament Student Manual, Zephaniah 1, 1-9. Is this prophecy of the near or the distant future? Beyond his message for Judah, Zephaniah asserted God's right and power to judge the whole earth. His design in cataloging all the various forms of life was to stress the complete scope of judgment. The reference to the wicked focuses attention on the main issue, sin and the inevitable consequences. This prophecy is in keeping with the dualism so common in the writings of Hebrew prophets. Zephaniah both anticipated Judah's impending disaster and foresaw the final destruction of all the wicked. The phrase, Day of the Lord, in Zephaniah 1:7 usually refers in the scriptures to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Back to the scriptures. And it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord, that there shall be the noise of a cry from the fish gate, and a howling from the second, and a great crashing from the hills. Howl, ye inhabitants of Maktesh, for all the merchant people are cut down. All they that bear silver are cut off. And it shall come to pass at that time that I will search Jerusalem with candles, and punish the men that are settled on their lees, that say in their hearts, The Lord will not do good, neither will he do evil. Therefore their good shall become a booty, and their houses a desolation. They shall also build houses, but not inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards, but not drink the wine thereof. The great day of the Lord is near, it is near, and hasteth greatly, even the voice of the day of the Lord. The mighty man shall cry there bitterly. That day is a day of wrath, a day of trouble and distress, a day of wasteness and desolation, a day of darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness, a day of the trumpet and alarm against the fenced cities and against the high towers. And I will bring distress upon men, that they shall walk like blind men, because they have sinned against the Lord, and their blood shall be poured out as dust, and their flesh as the dung. Neither their silver nor their gold shall be able to deliver them in the day of the Lord's wrath, and the whole land shall be devoured by the fire of his jealousy. For he shall make even a speedy riddance of all them that dwell in the land. Old Testament Student Manual, Zephaniah 1, 10-18. The great day comes, the people reap the judgments. The imagery of these verses may be difficult to understand because Zephaniah used terms familiar to listeners in his day, but unfamiliar to modern readers. The following information will be helpful. The fish gate was on the north end of the city. People there would be the first to see an enemy invading from the north. The fish gate opened into the part of the city known as the second quarter, probably because it was an expansion of the original city of David. This quarter would be the first reach from the north. Maktesh was the name of the merchant quarter, which lay in the second quarter, thus the reference to merchants, they that bear silver. To search with candles suggests an exhaustive search, since in the poorly lighted houses of those times, one would have to use a candle to look for a lost object at night. Settled on their lees is a figure drawn from winemaking. The lees are the thick residue of the pulp of the grapes. Good wine, when it remains for a long time upon its lees, becomes stronger, but bad wine becomes harsher and thicker. The interpretation of the symbol is that wicked men, like bad wine, remain apathetic about the true religion and become increasingly harsh and bitter. Back to the scriptures, Zephaniah chapter 2. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. Judgment will come upon the Philistines, the Moabites, the children of Ammon, the Ethiopians, and the Assyrians. Gather yourselves together, yea, gather together, O nation not desired. Before the decree bring forth, before the day pass as the chaff, before the fierce anger of the Lord come upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger come upon you. Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. For Gaza shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon a desolation. They shall drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up. Woe unto the inhabitants of the sea coast, the nation of the Cherethites. The word of the Lord is against you, O Canaan, the land of the Philistines. I will even destroy thee, that there shall be no inhabitant. And the sea coast shall be dwellings and cottages for shepherds, and folds for flocks. And the coast shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah. They shall feed thereupon. In the houses of Ashkelon shall they lie down in the evening, for the Lord their God shall visit them, and turn away their captivity. I have heard the reproach of Moab, and the revilings of the children of Ammon, whereby they have reproached my people, and have magnified themselves against their border. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord of hosts, of God of Israel, the God of Israel, surely Moab shall be as Sodom, and the children of Ammon as Gomorrah, even the breeding of nettles and salt pits, and a perpetual desolation. The residue of my people shall spoil them, and the remnant of my people shall possess them. This shall they have for their pride, because they have reproached and magnified themselves against the people of the Lord of hosts. The Lord will be terrible unto them, for he will famish all the gods of the earth, and men shall worship him, every one from his place, even all the isles of the heathen. Ye Ethiopians also, ye shall be slain by my sword. And he will stretch out his hand against the north and destroy Assyria, and will make Nineveh a desolation, and dry like a wilderness. And flocks shall lie down in the midst of her, all the beasts of the nations, both the cormorant and the bittern shall lodge in the upper lintels of it. Their voice shall sing in the windows, desolation shall be in the thresholds, and he shall uncover the cedar work. This is the rejoicing city that dwelt carelessly, that said in her heart, I am, and there is none beside me. How is she become a desolation, a place for beasts to lie down in? Every one that passeth by her shall hiss and wag his hand. Old Testament Student Manual, Zephaniah 2. Is there hope of any escaping the wrath when the day of the Lord comes? Judah was not the only nation ripe for destruction. The foreign peoples who taunted and reviled Judah were even more worthy of annihilation. Each of them would share in the impending doom. Still, there was some hope. Those who see the worst in human nature are often the first to see a gleam of hope. Following the gloom, unmitigated and unrevealed in any way, Zephaniah sends one shaft of light into the darkness. A remnant may yet be saved. He does not see any way of escape for any but for the humble, whom he mentions in contrast to the proud, who have provoked the jealous wrath of God. Back to the scriptures, Zephaniah chapter 3. At the second coming, all nations will assemble to battle. Men will have a pure language. The Lord will reign in their midst. Woe to her that is filthy and polluted, to the oppressing city. She obeyed not the voice, and received not correction. She trusteth not in the Lord. She drew not near to her God. Her princes within her are roaring lions. Her judges are evening wolves. They gnaw not the bones till the morrow. Her prophets are light and treacherous persons. Her priests have polluted the sanctuary. They have done violence to the law. The just Lord is in the midst thereof. He will not do iniquity. Every morning doth he bring his judgment to light. He faileth not, but the unjust knoweth no shame. I have cut off the nations. Their towers are desolate. I made their streets waste, that none passeth by. Their cities are destroyed, so that there is no man, that there is none inhabitant. I said, surely thou wilt fear me, thou wilt receive instruction, so their dwelling should not be cut off. However, I punished them, but they rose early and corrupted all their doings. Old Testament Student Manual, Zephaniah 3, 1-7, a warning and a promise. Zephaniah turned again to Jerusalem with both warning and promise. He condemned many groups in Judah's society, including the political leaders, the judges, the prophets, and the priests. Corruption was at every level. He stressed the constant righteousness and justice of the Lord, who continually brings down wicked people and nations. All hope was not to be lost, however, because there would still be a remnant with whom God could work and bring to pass his righteous purposes. In addition, there is always God's unbounded mercy. The righteous in any age can take comfort in their righteousness. Back to the scriptures. Therefore, wait ye upon me, saith the Lord, until the day that I rise up to the prey. For my determination is to gather the nations, that I may assemble the kingdoms, to pour upon them mine indignation, even all my fierce anger. For all the earth shall be devoured with the fire of my jealousy. For then will I turn to the people a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of the Lord, to serve him with one consent. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering. In that day shalt thou not be ashamed for all thy doings, wherein thou hast transgressed against me, for then I will take away out of the midst of them that rejoice in thy pride, and thou shalt no more be haughty because of my holy mountain. I will also leave in the midst of thee an afflicted and poor people, and they shall trust in the name of the Lord. The remnant of Israel shall not do iniquity, nor speak lies, neither shall a deceitful tongue be found in their mouth. For they shall feed and lie down, and none shall make them afraid. Sing, O daughter of Zion, shout, O Israel, be glad and rejoice with all the heart, O daughter of Jerusalem. The Lord hath taken away thy judgments, he hath cast out thine enemy, the King of Israel, even the Lord, is in the midst of thee. Thou shalt not see evil any more. In that day it shall be said to Jerusalem, fear thou not, and to Zion, let not thine hands be slack. The Lord thy God in the midst of thee is mighty. He will save. He will rejoice over thee with joy. He will rest in his love, and he will joy over thee with singing. I will gather them that are sorrowful for the solemn assembly, who are of thee, to whom the reproach of it was a burden. Behold, at that time I will undo all that afflict thee, and I will save her that halteth it, and gather her that was driven out. And I will get them praise and fame in every land where they have been put to shame. At that time I will bring you again, even in the time that I gather you, for I will make you a name and a praise among all people of the earth, when I turn back your captivity before your eyes, saith the Lord. Old Testament Student Manual, Zephaniah 3:8-20, Zephaniah's final message. The prophet concluded on a note of optimism. The day will come when God's people shall not see evil anymore. Those who have borne the burden of reproach shall be gathered from afar and become a name and a praise among men. Zephaniah saw our day and beyond. In it he both suffered and rejoiced. He suffered in spirit because of the desolation and destruction which he saw, but he was able to use this as a warning and threat to his own people. In the redemption and final blessings of Israel, he saw a ray of hope to extend to Judah. No prophet has written more clearly or vigorously of the day of the Lord. Zephaniah must be added to the list of prophets who give us a grave warning of disaster. Points to ponder. The prophets and the last days. Do you find the language and imagery of the Old Testament prophets difficult? Many do, but that should not become discouraging. The language and means of expression are far removed from the way we speak today. But gaining an understanding of them is worth the price of extra study, for the message has great application. Even though the prophets spoke to their own people and of their own times, through the inspiration they received, they also spoke again and again of the last dispensation. There is great value in studying the writings of these men, for they saw our day and told us how to prepare for it. Come follow me manual, Zephaniah. See ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth. Zephaniah prophesied that the people of Judah would be completely destroyed by the Babylonians because of their wickedness. I will utterly consume all things from off the land, saith the Lord. And yet Zephaniah also said that a remnant would be preserved. As you read these prophecies, notice the kinds of attitudes and behaviors that led Judah and other groups to destruction. See especially Zephaniah 1:4-6 and verse 12, Zephaniah 2, verses 8, 10, and 15, and Zephaniah 3:1-4. Then look for the characteristics of the people God would preserve. See Zephaniah 2:1-3, Zephaniah 3:12-13, and 18-19. What message do you feel the Lord has for you in these verses? Zephaniah 3:14-20 describes the joy of the righteous after the Lord hath cast out thine enemy. What blessings promised in these verses stand out to you? Why is it important to you to know about these blessings? You might compare these verses to the experience described in 3 Nephi 17 and ponder how Jesus Christ feels about his people, including you. Ideas for family scripture study and home evening. Nahum 1:7. How is the Lord like a stronghold? Perhaps your family could build a simple stronghold or fortress in your home and discuss Nahum 1:7 while inside it. What makes our day a day of trouble? How do Jesus Christ and his gospel fortify us? How do we show that we trust in him? Habakkuk 2:14. How can we help fulfill the prophecy in these verses? Habakkuk 3:17-19. What do we learn from Habakkuk's example in these verses? Zephaniah 2:3. You could play a game in which your family members have to find the words righteousness and meekness on a page with many other words. They could then talk about examples of righteousness and meekness they have seen in each other. What does it mean to seek righteousness and meekness? Zephaniah 3:14-20. What do we find in Zephaniah 3:14-20 that makes us want to sing, be glad, and rejoice with all the heart? Perhaps your family could sing hymns or songs that come to mind as they read these verses. For more ideas for teaching children, see this week's outline and come follow me for a primary. Suggested song, Seek the Lord Early.